Hi everyone, my name is James Teague, and today I'm going to be giving a presentation on security governance. Alright, so we're going to go over the agenda just so everyone can be on the same page with what's covered in this presentation and in what order. So the first thing I'm going to do is answer two basic questions. What is security governance and why is security governance necessary? I say basic questions, but really we're going to expand and analyze them pretty critically to figure out the different components of security governance and then look at some of the benefits of it and, of course, why it's absolutely necessary in today's world. And next, we're going to overview my recently developed ISSP. And then third, we'll go over some of the regulatory issues that could be involved with the ISSP I developed. All right, so what is security governance? Broadly, it's just the implementation of information security into the overall strategic plan of the company. Instead of it being an isolated department, just the IT department handling security or just the information security department handling it, it's taken from a top-down approach. So executives are involved, the president, the owner, whoever it may be, they're all involved in the overall strategic plan, and now information security is a part of that. So typically it's a three-pronged approach: governance, risk management, and compliance. So, governance ensuring that objectives are achieved, and then risk management, they're managing risk, whatever environment they're in, however much risk affects them, and compliance, making sure they're complying with all regulations, laws, etc. And then the governance board, that basically is what I was mentioning. So you have all these people from the top of the company involved on the governance board, and they're all deciding how information security is going to be handled in the company instead of just passing it off to a different department. All right, so now let's answer this question. Why is security governance necessary? So as I was saying in the last slide, it helps incorporate information security into the overall strategic plan of the company. Instead of making it the responsibility of an isolated department, it's the responsibility of everyone in the company, starting with the top. So executives are on board with the plan. They got board members, their people right below them. Everyone is involved with this plan, and everyone knows what to do for their appropriate department in case something happens. Historically, it was more of a, yeah, we'll let the IT guys figure it out if something happens, and we don't really have anything to do with that. That's their department. Information security is not a big deal. They'll figure it out if something happens. Now, obviously, we know that's wrong. Um, you know, we don't have a reactive approach. We have more of a proactive approach now. We're not waiting for something to happen. We're trying to prevent things from happening in every possible way because we know it's not if something happens, it's when it happens. So with security governance, we can allocate resources and have a plan for the entire organization in case of disaster. Most companies now facing security threats have business continuity plans to continue their operations even when disaster strikes. So they have these plans in place, everything's written out. It's not like, hey, what do we do now? We just got attacked. It's, oh yeah, we got attacked in this method at this time on these systems. This is what we're supposed to do to react to this. This is what we're supposed to do to prevent it from happening again. This is what we're supposed to do, so on and so on forth. So now it's not a, like I said, departmental approach, it's an organizational approach. So that's why security governance is so necessary because of the world we live in, because of the constant threats companies face. They can no longer just accept it as being the responsibility of one department. It has to be the responsibility of the entire organization. So I wanted to go over a couple cases where companies were publicly embarrassed, where they lost customers, they lost faith from their customers, and obviously you want to avoid that if possible. So PlayStation, this happened several years ago, I believe it's 2011. They had leaked information for 77 million accounts. 77 million, and possibly credit card data on all those accounts. So obviously people aren't going to want to keep using PlayStation after something like that happens. Um, Extremely confidential information being leaked, loss of faith in the company. The network was shut down, the gaming network, for 23 days. PlayStation didn't even tell their customers about it for a week after the attack happened. So it's just not a good look for the company. That was, like I said, that was in 2011. Now I know companies are much more proactive, one, about telling their customers that happened. It's good to just be transparent. That's really the best approach. Say, hey, we got hacked. we've done everything to prevent it, but we still got hacked because it's not always preventable. Something's going to happen eventually. But being transparent about that and letting you know what you're doing to fix it, what you're going to do in the future so it doesn't happen again, all that goes a really long way. So PlayStation obviously doesn't do that. They have, they're doing good now, so they've definitely learned from their mistakes. Next, Jackson County in Georgia, hackers shut down all of their IT systems except the website and 911 or 911, excuse me, emergency systems. And they were required, or the hackers asked for $400,000 in ransomware, and they did pay it so that they could get their operations back online. But if they had focused more on security governance, their information security, of course, specifically, but security governance as an entire organization, they could have prevented this from happening, not had to shell out $400,000 just so they can use the systems that they created. So it does lead to many benefits for companies. It's really a save money approach in the long run. Instead of constantly spending money on fixing issues, on losing customers, you're spending money to prevent things from like that from happening and then causing you to lose even more money. You can increase your predictability of events. Like what to expect from certain hacks, from certain threats. That's an ever-changing climate, so you want your employees to be as knowledgeable as possible on the most up-to-date security threats. And really, it's important because it's the responsibility of everyone in the company to keep information secure. Another reason why security governance is so necessary is because every single person in the company is a liability. One person can make a mistake that everyone has to pay for. So if you don't have this approach that everyone has to be responsible, everyone has to be knowledgeable, then you're going to suffer for it. All right, so in this slide, we're going to go over some of the highlights of the ISSP I created for the fictitious company B3SI. And the ISSP was over the use of the organizational networks and the internet services. So, all the systems that hold data, the email, whatever it may be, it's all included in that. First section is the statement of purpose. So this has the scope, definition of technology addressed, and responsibilities listed for different groups of employees. So scope, I just basically said that the purpose of this policy is to address the appropriate use of organizational networks and internet services by anyone who uses systems, employees, contractors, associates, consultants, anyone involved, this policy applies to. Definition of technology address, that was just some basic definitions. I won't get into that. Responsibilities, there's several of these, so I'll touch on a few. Because there's no CIO or CISO for this company, I made it the CEO's duty to create policy, how he saw fit to best lead the organization. Then I went into detail about some of the different offices, the Office of Access Control, Office of Network and Internet Security, what their functions are, and what exactly they're supposed to do in the organization. All right, so section 2 was authorized uses. So this section has user access, fair and responsible use, protection of privacy involved in it. So user access, just some basic stuff like the Office of Access Control assigns user access levels. And you have to go through the proper channels to get those assigned, removed, upgraded. You go through your supervisor, and then they submit a request. You can't, and then I also touched on this section, some restrictions on user access. So I took a pretty strict approach. You can't use the resources of the company off company premises or without the proper company devices or outside of company hours. Can't bring in your personal devices or anything like that. Can't share your passwords. Can't share your computer for anyone or anything like that. And anything, anyone going against those policies could result in discipline, loss of access, etc. So fair and responsible use, just that, you can use all the basic software for your functions. Use the Traverse accounting software to, for general ledgers, pay accounts receivable, or payable, excuse me, or anything else like that. So just all the basic software and what you can use it for. And then next section, protection of privacy. So I just basically said we're handling sensitive data. It's every system user's responsibility to protect that data, following the appropriate policies. So the motto is need to know or at least privilege. If you don't have a need to know that data and you realize you have access to it, it's your responsibility to tell someone so that they can remove your access. And similarly, you want the least privilege, so you want to have the least amount of access you need to do your job. All right, so number 3 is prohibited uses. So in what ways we can't use it. The subsections for this was disruptive use or misuse, criminal use, offensive or harassing materials, and copyrighted license or other intellectual property. So these are pretty detailed as well. I'll just go over a few. So, disruptive use or misuse is basically using the organization networks or internet services for any way that does not directly support the company's objectives. So, if you're on social media at work, that's not really supporting the company objectives, that's considered misuse. I took a pretty strict approach with that. So I know some companies are more freelance about it. They'll let people do what they want, but I said you can't use the company printers for yourself. You can't use any of the software for yourself. No using Photoshop on your lunch or whatever to create your own design, or anything like that. So no personal shopping, social media, etc. And then criminal use, I touched on just no leak. You can't leak data. Obviously, you can't try to override your privileges and give yourself more access. That is all considered criminal use, and that violators will be terminated possibly or face internal discipline, or if it's a criminal act, of course, face possible criminal charges. Next subsection, harassing materials. Basically, I just said anything, any form of cyberbullying, since this is networks and internet services. So doxing or threats over email, anything like that is strictly prohibited. If you violate those policies, same thing, internal discipline, termination, etc. Then copyrighted is the last subsection. So obviously, no employee should download copyrighted materials. If it doesn't say if it's copyrighted or not, go ahead and assume it is and don't download it. All right, section 4, systems management. So this was the management of stored materials, employer monitoring, virus protection, physical security, and encryption. I won't go over every single one of these, just in the essence of time, but basically stored materials have to all be locked away. If if you have physical data, it goes in the appropriate places that are locked. Shred bins are around for anything that's supposed to be shredded. 5-year retention policy, etc. Anytime you leave your workstation, log out. It's your responsibility. Employee monitoring, I took a strict approach, so I did say they would monitor web traffic, email communications, phone calls, company travel through different methods, video surveillance, GPS, URL blocking, etc. And I'll go ahead and move on to number 5, violations of policy. So you can report violations online anonymously. There's a form for that. And you can say who it is, what they're doing, what department. And then also in this section, I included that if you see someone violating policy and don't report it, you're liable as well. Penalties for violation, discipline, termination, possible legal prosecution. If criminal prosecution is warranted, that B3SI will assist in any way possible with law enforcement. And then section 6, policy management. So basically I said there would be an annual review of policy, and that throughout the year, company or employees can submit anonymous recommendations. Those will be stockpiled, reviewed at that yearly review, or if they're immediately necessary, they'll be reviewed at that time. And you can find all the policies online. There's modules online that every employee is responsible for doing once a year. And the senior policy manager and the department policy management has to make sure that that's done by everyone. And the last section is just limitations of liability. So just saying that B3SI assumes no liability if organizational networks or internet services are used for criminal acts. That individual is acting on their own intent, and we'll do everything in our power to prevent that from happening and also stop them if it does happen. All right, so last thing we're going to go over is regulatory issues. The main thing to know with regulations is that it's an ever-changing environment, especially with data security and privacy, which are the two main regulatory changes that would affect my ISSP. When new threats come out, when new methods of data collection or data storage come out, regulations are going to change, and in turn, B3SI is going to have to change its policy. So the idea I have for an annual review is great, but we need to know that this climate constantly changes, and that changes may have to be made sooner than that. So it's better to be on the forefront than to kind of be reactive to this. You want to see how the changes in in technology are happening, and then kind of go ahead and assume how those regulations could change. So I did want to give kind of one example of a recent regulation change with the new Privacy Act that could affect the way companies did business. This was passed in 2018, but it's a California Consumer Privacy Act. It was created to help the citizens of California know what personal data is being collected about them, know whether it's being sold and to whom. They have the option to say no to the sale of it. They have access to their data. They can request a business to delete their personal information, and they have the right not to be discriminated against for exercising their privacy rights. So obviously, this could affect the way several companies do business. They have to change, maybe change their method of data collection, potentially delete customer data, making it hard to continue business operations, um, whatever it may be. So anything like this can get passed, and you're gonna have to update your policies. You're gonna have to change the way you possibly do business. So that's just one example, but you can see how any changes in regulations like that could kind of be a landslide effect for all the businesses. And that's just California. So think of all these businesses that operate in multiple states that new laws are getting passed, different states or even multinational corporations, different countries. So it's definitely some food for thought. Food for thought. The best thing to do is just be prepared and be knowledgeable on the current environment. And these are the references, but I thank you everyone for listening.